The wind was already screaming before the engines even started. Taipei, October 31st, 2000. Typhoon Xangsane was tearing across the island. Sheets of rain slammed against the terminal windows. Visibility dropped, then dropped again. Inside the cockpit of Singapore Airlines Flight SQ006, everything looked routine. The aircraft was a Boeing 747-400. Destination, Los Angeles. On board, 179 people. Fuel loaded, flight plan filed, clearance expected. But here is the question that still haunts aviation investigators. How does a fully trained, experienced crew line up on a runway that was officially closed? How does a modern wide-body aircraft begin its takeoff roll on a strip that should never have been used? And why did nobody stop it? This was not a mechanical failure, not a terrorist act, not a hidden defect in the aircraft. This was something far more unsettling. It was a chain of decisions, and that chain began long before the throttles moved forward. Singapore Airlines SQ006 was scheduled to depart Chiang Kai-shek International Airport just before midnight. Weather conditions were deteriorating by the hour. Heavy rain, strong crosswinds, poor visibility. The crew received clearance to taxi to runway 05L. That was the active runway. Parallel to it sat runway 05R. It looked almost identical on charts. Same orientation, same direction. But 05R was closed for construction. Barriers had been placed on it. Heavy equipment was positioned along the surface. Sections of lighting were inactive. Under normal daylight conditions, the difference would be obvious. But this was not daylight. This was wind-driven rain at night. The cockpit workload increased quickly. Taxi instructions, weather updates, crosswind limits, every call required attention. The captain began taxiing. The aircraft followed the yellow centerline markings through standing water. Wind gusts shook the fuselage. Visibility outside was minimal. The first officer cross-checked the route. The airport diagram was available, but outside, visual cues were blurred by rain and reflections. As the aircraft approached the runway complex, a critical moment arrived. The aircraft needed to turn left. Instead, it continued slightly further forward. And then it aligned with 05R, the closed runway. There was no verbal confirmation of runway number, no challenge, no correction. At that exact moment, the mistake became physical. But nobody in the cockpit realized it yet. If you want clear, detailed breakdowns of real aviation incidents without exaggeration or fiction, make sure you subscribe. These stories matter because the lessons still apply today. The throttles moved forward. 4 engines spooled up against the storm. The aircraft began to roll. Rain hammered the windshield so hard it looked like static on a broken screen. Water sprayed outward from the main landing gear in thick white sheets. Acceleration felt normal. Engine instruments showed no anomalies, no warnings, no system failures. Inside the cockpit, the crew monitored airspeed, 80 knots. The first officer called it out. The captain's hand rested lightly on the throttles. The aircraft continued to accelerate, but outside, something was wrong. Runway 05R was not designed for a departure that night. Construction equipment sat further down the strip. Concrete barriers blocked portions of the surface. Temporary lighting systems were incomplete. In clear weather, those obstructions would have been visible. In a typhoon at midnight, they were shadows inside darkness. 100 knots. The aircraft was now committed. The rain distorted the runway lights into streaks. Reflections from standing water blurred the visual picture even more. There was no external cue strong enough to trigger immediate doubt. No radio call from ATC, because from the tower, visibility was also severely limited. Controllers assumed the aircraft had lined up correctly on 05L. Inside the cockpit, attention narrowed. The captain focused on directional control. Strong crosswinds from the right pushed against the vertical stabilizer. Rudder inputs corrected drift. The first officer scanned instruments, 140 knots. The aircraft was seconds from decision speed. Beyond this point, rejecting the takeoff would be nearly impossible. Then, at approximately 150 knots, shapes began to appear ahead. Not runway centerline lights, not the long, unobstructed stretch expected. Dark masses, low silhouettes, construction equipment. The captain had less than 3 seconds to process what he was seeing. At that speed, the aircraft was covering more than 75 meters every second. He initiated a rejected takeoff, throttles idle, maximum braking, reverse thrust deployed. But physics does not negotiate at high speed. The Boeing 747 struck concrete barriers. It tore through heavy equipment. The impact ripped open the lower fuselage. The right wing separated. Fuel ignited instantly. A fireball erupted into the storm. The aircraft broke into sections across the runway. Inside the cabin, the force threw passengers forward. Overhead bins burst open. Smoke filled the air within seconds. Rain and fire mixed in a violent, surreal scene. Some sections of the aircraft remained structurally intact. Others were destroyed almost immediately. The left side exits were accessible. The right side was engulfed in flames. Cabin crew shouted commands over chaos. Passengers struggled with seatbelts. Outside, typhoon winds pushed flames unpredictably across the wreckage. Airport rescue vehicles were already responding, but the location, the closed runway, delayed immediate access. 83 people would not survive, 96 would. The difference between those numbers came down to location inside the aircraft and seconds. But the most difficult question was not about impact. It was about the moment before. How did a professional crew taxi onto the wrong runway at a major international airport? Why was there no final confirmation of runway heading? Why did the airport lighting not make the closure unmistakable? And why did no one, in cockpit or tower, detect the alignment error before takeoff power was applied? The answers would not be simple, and they would not point to a single failure. They would reveal something more dangerous, a series of small assumptions, compounded under pressure. The investigation would soon begin, and it would change cockpit procedures worldwide. The fire spread faster than anyone expected. Jet fuel poured from ruptured tanks and ignited in the wind. Typhoon gusts pushed flames sideways, then back again. Rain did not extinguish the fire, it fed it with steam and chaos. Inside the cabin, visibility dropped to almost zero. Smoke filled the aisles within seconds. Emergency lights flickered through thick grey air. Passengers shouted over the roar of wind and burning fuel. The aircraft had broken into multiple sections. The nose section remained partially intact. The forward left exits were usable. Cabin crew immediately began evacuation commands. Release seatbelts. Leave everything. Come this way. But not all exits were accessible. The right side of the aircraft was consumed by fire. Slides deployed into flames. Some exits were blocked by debris and structural collapse. Passengers seated toward the rear faced a different reality. The impact had caused severe structural damage in that area. Fire penetrated quickly through torn fuselage sections. Heat intensified rapidly. Survivors later described the inside as disorienting. Darkness, screaming, the smell of burning insulation, water pouring in from broken panels, then flashes of orange light. Some passengers froze, others moved blindly toward any visible glow that suggested an exit. Crew members continued shouting instructions despite smoke inhalation. Several returned into the cabin to guide trapped passengers. Outside, airport rescue teams fought extreme conditions. Heavy rain reduced visibility. Wind pushed smoke across the runway. The location, the closed 05R strip, required vehicles to reroute through service paths. Every minute mattered. In aviation fires, survivability often depends on the first 90 seconds. Those who escaped quickly through the forward, left exits survived. Those delayed by impact forces, seat damage, or blocked aisles faced deadly conditions. 83 lives were lost. Many were seated in areas where structural damage was greatest. The physical destruction told one story, but investigators needed to understand another. Why was the aircraft there in the first place? Black boxes were recovered. The flight data recorder confirmed acceleration parameters were normal. The cockpit voice recorder revealed no confusion about takeoff clearance. The crew believed they were on runway 05L. There was no last-second realization spoken aloud before the rejected takeoff. No discussion of runway numbers. No cross-check of heading against the assigned runway. The error had gone undetected until visual contact with construction equipment. By then, physics had already decided the outcome. The disaster was not caused by a storm alone, not by equipment failure. It was something quieter, something procedural, and the investigation would soon expose it in detail. The investigation confirmed one fact immediately. the aircraft departed from runway 05R, a runway that was officially closed. Air traffic control had cleared SQ006 for 05L. The instructions were correct. The weather reports were accurate. The NOTAMs clearly stated that 05R was unavailable. The error occurred during the final taxi alignment. Instead of turning at the proper intersection toward 05L, the aircraft continued forward and lined up on 05R. In heavy rain, at night, with minimal external visibility, the two parallel runways looked nearly identical, but procedures existed to prevent this exact scenario. Before takeoff, crews are required to verify runway number visually and cross-check aircraft heading with the assigned runway heading. Runway 05L carried a magnetic heading of 050 degrees. That data was visible on cockpit instruments. No heading cross-check was verbalized. No final confirmation of runway 05L confirmed. Under pressure from weather and workload, assumption replaced verification. The captain believed they were correctly positioned. The first officer did not challenge the alignment. After the crash, investigators emphasized a critical lesson. Modern aircraft are technologically advanced, but they cannot protect against unchecked assumptions. Following SQ006, runway closure markings were strengthened worldwide. Cockpit procedures reinforced mandatory heading confirmation. CRM training intensified focus on assertive cross-checking. 83 people lost their lives on a runway that should have remained empty. Not because the aircraft failed, not because the storm was unstoppable, but because one final verification step never happened. If you want precise, fact-based breakdowns of aviation disasters and the lessons behind them, subscribe now. Every accident changed aviation, and every detail matters.